Welcome back, everybody. Oh, I'm glad to see you here. This is another one of those thought episodes where I had to try and figure out long before on how I was going to make this Y-track suspension work. I originally thought, hey, I'm going to take the control arms, I'm just going to extend them out. That's what I did in a couple things, just welded something on, well, looking at it going, okay, well, what has happened? You basically, when I've dumped the cars into the woods or hit something, what generally bends? The control arm. It's usually not the subframe. If you hit something so hard, the subframe, you're basically taking it all apart and doing that. And subframes aren't the easiest things to come by if you had to buy it new. So what I'm trying to do is I'm going to use stock control arms, but I'm going to change it. I am going to make this from a road car, because the road cars, especially with the Audis, they tried to eliminate a lot of the vibration through the subframe. That's the reason why there's rubber mounts in the subframe, and they bolt the subframe, and it's much easier for production. They bolt everything into the sub-assembly, and they bolt it up into the car. What's more expensive and more time consuming is building the chassis with the mounts on it. So what I'm going to do is just extend the mounts or make mounts on the actual chassis, just like I did with the engine, making the engine on a chassis, not on the actual structure. Is it going to be more vibration? Yeah. Do we care? No. So we're going to make this thing fit so we can use stock control arms. We bend the control arm, we buy a control arm and put it in, if that's what we need to do. That way, even if you hit something so hard where you're going to bend the mounts on the chassis, there's a good chance you're not going to be driving the car. It's going to be a long process to do it. Especially if you bend a subframe, you've already ripped the bolts out of the subframe, so you'll be welding it anyway. Let's put this thing on the lift. I am going to show you what pretty much what I'm going to be doing and what I'm going to be using for the subframe mounts, or the not subframe, the control arm mounts on the chassis. So let me get this up on the lift, and we'll start. The reason why I pull the doors and the rockers off with the lift pads, when they come out, what I want them is to sit underneath here, so I can get it all the underneath rust work. That's pretty much the deal with that, and that way they're as far away from your working where you're going to be working. Plus, getting the doors off, with the lift coming up and down, you can get in the car relatively simple. So that's the reason why I'm yanking the stuff off. We're going to start here at the end of the car, and as you can see, here's the toolboxes. They don't look like much. It looks pretty horrible, but in the end, hopefully they'll look fine. What we have to do is, we're working forward. As you can see, I put the extended CV shafts. I don't know. I have no idea where these came from. I just found them in the pile, and what it does is it extends out the track by about that much, which this is where we're going to have to move this control arm out. And what I am going to use is I'm going to be cutting the subframe right here, moving it out and welding it onto these, and then bracing it in the back. I'm also going to use these mounts right here for the skid plate. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a hole and put a pipe inside there, so you can just, with an extended bolt, you can just go right towards the body for doing the skid plate, or a skid plate mount, or whatever. I also had to cut the bolts out of here in order to get the diff out, because everything is so rusted. I started pulling the bolts off right here because I was just going to do one mount at a time. Every single one stripped because there was so much rust in this rust-free Vermont car. And if you take a look over here, there's so much rust in there. You put the Allen key in there and it just spins. This one, I actually had to put a 5/8 nut on, or 5/8 socket on it, pound it in there. There was so much rust, and I barely got enough, and I pulled it out. So I lucked out that way. And over here, we have the other side for the CV shaft, and it's about the same thing. This all has to come out first so we can lock everything in and make it work. As we go down to here, here's all the rust, all the way through here, all the way through here, and all the way up into here. And if you take a look, this subframe, when I cut these mounts, I'll grind that stuff off. And that's where I'll weld it. And I'll probably cut some of this stuff off so I don't poke myself in the eye. As we come to the front, take a look. This is a standard Vermont rust-free car. I have plates coming down from the roll cage, which I'm going to bend that way. That'll protect the rocket from when I jack it up with just a standard floor jack. Same thing over here. I have another plate, which I'm going to bend over. And it's just going to be pretty much, I measured it down, and this thing has more non-rusted metal than that side. But they'll flip right over, no problem. And they'll give me something to jack to. We have the subframes here. We have the ball joints extended out. I don't know how I'm going to do it yet. I don't want to cut up the subframe because I want to keep that as a spare for my Quattro. And over to here, we have all the standard stuff, but we'll get onto that. But let's first pull the rear diff and get it on the bench, and we'll get the bolts and start making them up. So let's go. Now you wonder why I wear a hat. All right, onto the bench it goes. Well, here we have the lovely diff. Let's get the die grinder. Let's get this stuff off, and then we're going to figure out how we can, we're just going to start building the plates. So we're going to put the diff back up into the subframe to line it up with these mounts. And then we're going to take each mount off individually, but we need to have it so we can get the mount off really simple. Like, 2 bolts down the bottom, or 1 bolt, or really loose, and just pull it off, and then we can just slot the mounts on it. But we just need to build the plates first for the side mounts and for the rear mount, just so we can mount it in the chassis. Same thing we did with the front engine, just using regular, suspension mounts. I'll show you what I'm using. All the rust. I knew it was going to spin, but I figured I'd just show you what happens. Now let's do the real thing. See, just cut the washer off. It gives enough relief, and you can just do it, and the mount was barely touched. Let me do the rest of them. Here we go. Only one broke off where I couldn't get it out. And it's frozen inside there. Just have to work a little bit. The diff has been demounted. It's starting to get cold. I got to put my jacket on. Now that we have the mounts off, we're not going to have too much problem building any of the plates for it. The only thing is, the plate for the rear mount, as you can see, is stepped. So what we have is, I went through the scrap pile, found a bunch of plates. This one's probably 1/4, 5/16 inch. That's about about a 1/4 inch, same thing. Maybe a little bit less on the one down there, but they're just plates I picked out and just had in the scrap bin. This one is going to be fine, but as you can see, it's going to have a couple of washers in order to meet the indentation down here for this bolt. It's not going to be a problem. I'll cut it up, a piece of pipe or something like that, or I'll just add a couple of washers and weld the washers together. Let me first, I want to put all the holes in these plates first, then I'm going to find some bolts, bolt it up. Let's throw this thing back in so we can start measuring, or not measuring, we can start fabric cobbling up the mounts that we can have the engine or the transmission rear differential sit in the actual chassis. You know it's getting cold out when I'm starting talking like that. All right, let me go grab my center punches and I'll get that done. Try and find the one that fits the tightest. These are American transfer punches, but they pretty much set up with metric stuff too. Yeah, that's as tight as I can get it, so. It's pretty much a 10 millimeter bolt. We have the mounts diagonally cut or holes drilled. Now I can honestly put, or with confidence, use the center punch and drill the rest of the holes. I feel much more confident that way, especially when I have, you know, the thing locked down. I know where the holes are. So not when I'm putting them up there, I have to drill them out or whatever. So I mean, you know, this one I'm going to have to use. I'm going to weld some washers onto it just to give it more more stability within the hole. That's about it. Then I'll put the old mounts back on this. We'll throw it back up and mock it up in the subframe as in stock location and build the mounts one by one. We'll start with like probably the right one, then the left one, then the rear one, or I'm not really sure which one. Well, when we get there, we'll find out. All right, well, let me drill these and we'll throw this bad Johnny back in the car. Here we have the differential in, and it's cold enough where I put my coat on. And it's actually spitting snow. All right, we have the differential in. We have it bolted up here on this side. We have it shimmed in the back to the original bolt setting where if you take a look at this CV joint and the drive shaft, there's no deflection whatsoever, even if you look underneath it. This is the least how can I put this? The least critical mount on this entire setup right now. All it is sitting flat on this mount, which is rusty and shitty. What I have to do now is to pull this out. One thing I have to take into consideration, you see this dip right here? This dished out portion? Well, they cast this so the exhaust would go up and through here and around the axle. And I want to keep that. So what am I going to use to replace the mount? This. We're going to use another old blown out shock, which I chopped long enough. I want to put it as close to the body as I can and as far down as I can, because I'll put a supporting ridge down, a supporting gusset down just to make sure. But what's this mount going to be doing? This mount's going to be controlling the actual torque of the differential. This mount right here will be supporting it, and the mount in the back will be supporting it. So it's really not going to have a lot of pull down. It's mainly torque. So if I can get it down here and up here with a triangle gusset, it should eliminate all the torque. I mean, yes, there is some weight coming down, but it's not that critical. So let me take this off, and I will get the other plate and throw that on there, and we'll start making the mount. Have a shock tube. Where do we want it? I kind of want it right on this, right here. Either on this side or on that side where one flat plate comes down where I can start bolting things in, and then I'll build the other plate onto the side. And looking at it, it might be good on the other side. So we have to get this mount out because it's sticking too far up, and it's so rusty, I have to cut the bolts off. we have to affix this onto the chassis. So I went looking through the scrap pile. What I found this, I believe this is off of a Speed 6 Mazda that got burnt up. What I was looking for, it doesn't have to be overkill because it doesn't do it a lot, but I need it to be relatively thick and relatively strong so the bolt wouldn't pull out. And also, the way the body was in the back, it's curved upward like this. So I found this bracket that I'm just going to cut off right here, right there. And that way I can put it on the chassis. It's going to be, it'll take up that curvature or the slant in the chassis. And the major thing, it's the correct bolt hole size. And that's how it'll look. It'll look like this. And I'll probably take this other side and weld it onto this. But what we also can do is, seeing how we have this lip right here, we can also plate to the chassis that way and plate on the other side. I mean, it gives us a lot of possibilities. And that's kind of why I wanted to stick it in there. And if I have to cut it out, guess what? I have to cut it out. So let me just give this quick zip, you know, because where it's flat right here, where it curves back out, don't need it. So I'm just going to cut it, and we will get right on to welding that thing up. Or at least welding at least one mount up. Oh, look at that. That'll go right there. Yes, we have the mount right here, really close to here, so I can brace it. But what I did find is I found this. This is another bracket that I have no idea what came from. But if I move this further that way, it helps me with the mount in the back, and I can use either this side or this side, depending on which one I'll probably use this, so I can go right here over to there, and it'll be really stiff. So, or I'll use it that side. I don't know, it's one of the two, but they both fit the bolts. I'll figure that out in just a second, but I never intended to use this mount, and I never intended to use that mount. I intended to use something completely different. But this is what happens when you start building the cars, is that what I need to do is I need to shorten this by a couple of probably 5-10 mil, something in between there. Probably 5-6 mil. Bring that down this way. That gives me enough room. I'm going to grind this off more. Cut this really thick piece. That way it goes in there and it's really strong. And if I have to, I can go from here up to here and box it in, so it's not going to go anywhere. I think that's the best solution. And I have no idea where this mount came from. One thing you have to check before you weld any of this in, before you weld this in, you have to make sure the drive shaft is absolutely completely straight. If I bring this over this way, and this thing is butted up right next to here, when you go back and look at it from the engine this way, it's absolutely straight. So that was the goal. So let me get the MIG welder. I'm going to put a shim right in here. I'm going to tack it up, and this thing, well, I'm going to weld up the whole thing just so it supports it. That way I can get this one next. And this is actually going to be easier, I think, but maybe not. Who knows? But let me get the MIG welder and tack this sucker up. This is the side of the mount that I want to actually support the front snout of the differential. This mount is meant for pull down force. It's not meant for torque. The other mount has a long moment arm, so that is controlling the torque, the twisting of the differential. What did I use? I'm using the front half, or the other part of the shock absorber, plus this is a center split down hold frame for a seat mount. It's really thick, 3-4 millimeters. It wouldn't fit the shock, so I cut it straight down. It's spread apart, and I'll put a plate in between it to allow it to close together. Now, with both things like this, I can conform it to the chassis, which I ground down. And after I weld this up, I'm going to put this here, and make one here and one here to support it. I'll actually probably put 3 of them in there, make it look kind of cool. and we have the front part of this now. The rear will be augmented, both front mount and both front torsional and supporting mounts, and I'll show you that in just a second. But let me just get the welder and I'll pop this in. Got to make a plate for this, and I'll weld that up. That's not going anywhere. Let's cut it right here and weld this to this. Then we can put a plate right in there and support this front differential. All right, now we got to weld one small one from here to here. I'm going to take that rod, cut a little small piece off of it, and then I am going to weld that, pull this down, jack up, and pull the subframe off. Then we can get the back ones done. That's not going anywhere. Let me support the back. Pull down the subframe. Well, good. Let's go get the new plate and weld it in so we can make new mounts. Yeehaw! Now we have to get some washers underneath here and bolt that down. Now, let me show you what I'm going to use for the mounts for this. You'll get a kick out of it. At least it's German parts. All right, the big day. This is what we're going to use for the rear mounts on the differential. This right here is a Jetta control arm. Generally on a Jetta control arm or any Mark III, this bushing right here is the one that goes bad. I've had a bunch of them go bad. This bushing I've never had go bad, you know, and I've had numerous Corrados and all that stuff. It's the same control arm. You know, the early Corrado and the late Corrado, just is the difference between Mark II and Mark III. That's all it is, you know, and that'll dictate your CV joint. But what we're trying to do here is we're going to use this portion of it because you can buy these for like $25 off a Rock Auto or some ridiculous little amount of money. But we're going to take this portion. We're going to have two, one on one side, one on the other. What does that do? Torsional force reduces it. You know, it takes the stress out of the torsional force on this portion of the control arm. It also supports the weight, so it takes a little bit of force off of that one, off of the side one for the weight down. So if I have two, they're going back and forth, I mean, and I'm going to have the bolts in sideways so you can just pull the bolt straight. I was going to have it like this, but this is going to get in the way. I'm not really sure because, you know, when I cut this all off, I'm not really sure where everything's going to cut off. Don't know yet. But the first thing is we can weld to this portion right here, just angle iron, cut it, drill it, and we have 4 mounts on the back. Instead of 3 mounts to mount the diff, we have 4. That's what I call motorsport. So let me cut this up and see what we got. Just keep trimming it until I like what I see. All right, let's do it. Now, this is what we're doing. That is how the mount's going to be. So any torsional forces, boom, no problem. You know, it'll have more than enough surface area to have, you know, when the dip is hanging down to support that also. All I do is cut a couple pieces of steel, put right here, run bolts through. That would be good. We could even run 1 bolt if we really wanted to, but not really sure about that yet. But first, I need to take down this ridge so it gives us a flat surface to weld to. After that, I need to also cut this so this bolt can easily go, and just start grinding down a little bit so we can get the bolts off when we need to and have a flat surface area. Oh, let me jump into or leap into action. So this is how it's going to rest. We need room for the bolt to be pulled out, which is of course, and there we go. It's sitting flat against here. This bolt right here, this long bolt, is a bolt from either a Sierra Cosworth, Escort, or Mercurex R4TI, Sapphire, and Scorpio, stuff like that. It's what holds the rear differential in. It's about the longest bolt I could find to put that in. But I'm going to use that to straighten it out, give it a couple of quick tacks. But first I'm going to remove the undercoating right here so I can just do some tacks and weld in some angle or whatever else I find. That way we can get this thing unsupported and have a diff that's mounted to the chassis. Look at all the room. Room moving magic. I have this. It's going to go right on here. What it is, just a couple pieces of flat stock, a couple holes put in there, that one bolt, nothing, you know. Pretty much just going to put it on here and weld it to that plate, you know, weld the sides as much as I can, then pull the plate and weld that better. So that's pretty much it. I just have to do a little bit of cleaning on the edges for me to weld it. That's it. We'll get this in, then we go right to the suspension. Well, it looks hillbilly. Look at that. Whew. It looks like garbage, but when we trim it all up, because this thing will be trimmed here, this will go down at an angle and it'll look almost stock. At least I'm hoping it will be. Same thing here. I'm going to cut and try and trim this all down. And no, you know, we need to cut that right there. But seeing how my main goal is to get this suspension in, I got to get this in. That's the next thing. So that's pretty much it. Let's run that. The diff is in, and I feel safe enough to stand underneath it. Now, as you can see me putting in that drive shaft, now you know why I want no subframes on this thing. Because everything will be easy to pull off. What happens in a rally? Okay, you're in a rally, you break a CV shaft, you got, you know, a 20-minute service to do everything plus change a CV shaft. When you have all this room where you have the CV shaft, just pull the bolts, boom. Or let's say you have to do a diff. This way, you know, once the skid plate comes down, you push that out to the side, 4 bolts, the 3 shafts, the 4 bolts is down, back up. None of this trying to get, you know, maneuver a hammer in there, I mean a ratchet in there and all this other stuff. This will be easy. I mean, this all has to be trimmed and I'll make it look nice, but that is not my main concern. My main concern is getting everything in and working. Now, let me go cut up the subframes. I'm just going to cut the old mounts off, cut it in half, and then we're going to try and figure out the rest of the stuff. Whew. Slow but surely. I think it's time to fit them. Now, we have the subframe basically, you know, pushed up into the body with this jack. And we have a lot of things we have to think about. You know, we have to do step 1, 2, 3, stuff like that.
Okay, first thing, we have to center these bolts. So I basically lined it up pretty much where the subframe is going to be. I'll mark it because I got to cut a hole here to X out the bolt, and I got to make sure what I don't want to strip any more undercoating than I have to. But that's pretty much neither here nor there. So what we have to do is get on with the design philosophy that we have to first thing set the control arms to the strut. Second thing, we have to make sure this actual setup is going to be strong enough to where the control arm bends when we hit something. And we have to think about certain forces. Certain forces are the side impact because of the rally car, you're sideways. So we have to figure out, and we have to also make this, I want to try and make it as light as possible because as you can see, here's the mount right here. I'm just going to cut that off. That's no worries, but I'm going to do that afterwards because once everything's in and all squared away, that way I can, add lightness and just plate it to it. But first things first, we need to make this thing relatively square, which I did, and then we got to make it strong from forward forces, from you hitting a rock with a wheel right here, side forces when you're hitting a stump or into a ditch this way, So those are the two major forces that we're going to have to be dealing with. And if you're going to say the subframe is stronger, well, I'm going to have to differ because I'm welding it right to the subframe mounting points. And plus, I'm going to brace it to the frame. The subframe, the strongest or the weakest link in the subframe is the mounts. That's neither here nor there when you're looking at it this aspect, but we first have to weld it to the subframe, be able to access the mounts, and then weld it to the frame on right here and right here. Then we have to also figure out, if we're doing all this work, we got to have the best serviceability possible. And there's some things in Audi land that they did was just absolutely awful for service. So we're going to make this thing serviceable, to get a control arm off of this thing fast, to get a CV joint off of this thing fast, to get the least amount of restrictions in the way of an exhaust. So it gives us more leeway, That's the whole thing. And being in Audi land, you just don't think of it as just what Audi did is gospel. I've seen that too many times. What opened my eyes was Ford racing, Ford Rally of Europe, looking at what they did. And then I started to look around and say, okay, what did Mazda do? What did Toyota do? What did, blah, 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 blah. Because if you can get the best things out of all of them, then you can build something that's kind of cool. And the biggest thing is serviceability, because if you have to remove 30 things to get at one thing, to me, that's just ridiculous, for a service item. It's one thing when it's a differential or something like that, or a transmission when it's not supposed to be serviceable. But in a rally car, they are, because they generally blow. That's why I made the fronts the way they are and the rear differential the way it is. So let's get on to I gotta remove the undercoating and let's start cutting. Subframe is just sitting there. Don't breathe on it because it might move. What it is I have the bolt holes lined up on either side. And I have the CV shaft set. So I put some spacers up on the top to give it a rough height of where it will sit normally. And I brought it back and forth. In the middle is where the CV shaft, so it'll give me plenty of play inward and outward. If I have to do some other fancy stuff, okay. But first, I'm going to tack this in, and then we're going to start bracing to make sure this thing does not move. Because after we brace it correct, or we give it enough weld to allow it not to move, then we're going to start cutting off all the extras and make the thing serviceable. now that we have the subframe tacked, we need this not to move. And over here, same thing. So what I did is I went to the scrap pile, found this. This is one of the some of the metal that we use to build the struts. I'm looking around going, wow, it goes right here, and I can put it in. So all I do is I'm going to grind this. Actually, I'm going to put it over here at an angle because I want to brace up inside here also. Well, actually, from here down to here is what I want to brace. So let me get the grinder. I'll grind that relatively smooth and clean this up. Then I'm going to weld this, so this will be stationary. Then we'll do this. I'll try and find something else and do it over here also, so we can start cutting up that side. That side welded. We know this side is not going to go anywhere because it's attached. That's it. What do we want to do? As you can see, I ground down like right here. This indentation right here is for the exhaust. So I want to stop it right here. And I want to take the Sawzall, I'm going to cut at an angle and plate it right to there. I'm going to see if I can use this, reuse some of this with the grinder. But the first thing is using the Sawzall to cut this so I can tie it into right here. This way, this won't move at all. Once it's all welded and sealed in, it's not going to go anywhere. And that's, hopefully hopefully the Imagineering aspect of this works. So let me grab the Sawzall. Here is the subframe material. All it is maybe 2.5 millimeter thick. Pressed steel, stamped, nothing that great. So what I was thinking about doing is using this. What it is in order to cut a piece of metal for that size, it's going to be, really, bad. So it's kind of an odd shape, but this thing is the odd shape that I need. So what do I want? Well, I want this thing to go like this, right here. Oops. At that angle, and this to go from the bottom. Probably like right here and down like that. And actually I'm going to cut up like that and let's see if it works. Movie magic. That took 10 minutes. That's how we're going to make it look. So what I'm going to do is just pound it down a little bit. Just a little bit more grinding. Then I got to grind all this stuff off. Whew, then weld it. So we get this side stable. I think it looks pretty cool. Okay, we have this mount set up. It's, it doesn't look too bad. I mean, it's tacked in enough where I know it's not going to fall. That's the main thing. Over here, we have that other rod put in so it won't fall. Nothing will move. Next thing, serviceability. We have to be able to get the control arms out. Audi, in their infinite wisdom, put the smallest hole known to creation right here so you can't get a decent wrench on it. Especially when they're rusty. It's terrible. What I'm going to do? Well, I'm going to cut the center section right out, like that with a Sawzall. Then we're going to trim it back, and this section will be welded right to the frame. This should be really strong. And then I'm going to cut this thing right here too. But I'll have to wait to take off this tie rod end. When I take that off, that's when I'm going to cut this straight down like this and just plate it right into the chassis. So that way we don't have any of this stuff. It'll all be good. So let me just zip this out and I'll show you what I'm going to do there. You see I was just grinding that? What it is, this is under tension. This is what broke the blade. It wasn't because it was an old blade, it's just because this is under tension. So I have to stop it. And I don't want this to shift at all. So what I did, I had some square or rectangular tubing, ground that all up, and I'm just going to weld that right there. That way it's stationary, it won't go anywhere. And then I can go get more blades. Whew. Well, I don't think it's going anywhere. Let me go up and try and find another Sawzall blade so I can cut the center of this out. And I think we're going to end that episode like this, because that's an awful lot of stuff we've done. And plus, I'll do the other side, and I want to get this thing out anyway, but it's the same exact thing. And let's see, yeah, well, that's pretty much it. Let me get a Sawzall blade, then we'll wrap it up. Wow, what do we have? We have the mounts on the body, the mounts on the differential to bolt it to the body. There we go. We also have the mounts all welded on to the chassis to get the control arms situated. I have not, I just cut this center section out just to cut it out so it'll be easy to remove the CV shaft. This all for serviceability. Now, how I'm going to shape these is going to be another story, because I'm not going to shape them just yet. And I know I'm going to be putting more plates on it, to make sure it doesn't go, put a bar from here to here. It's all going to be triangulated, because you have to remember, when you're sliding sideways and you hit something, you don't want your chassis to go to the side. You want your control arm to bend, so this has to be much stronger. If the control arm bends, it's just what it was meant to be. Next time we're going to be doing the front suspension, which hopefully it's going to be easier, but it probably won't. And we'll do some other points, jacking points, then on to probably the Sport Quattro. Because this is a big thing. I didn't know how I was going to do it. I'm making this up as I go along. So I made that up. We'll see what happens, I mean, this might be able to work, this might work, this might not. Who knows? I just have to do this side off camera, and we will get back onto the front. So, and it looks like it's getting better weather, so I can do more. All right, well, hey, thank you very much. I'm just a recycling hillbilly and nothing special. You can do it. Trust me. Anybody can do this. I'm just someone who let's throw some parts together and let's see if it looks halfway decent. Oh, also, this is all prototyping. This is not finished product. When we get that closer, that's when everything gets sheared, everything gets cut and holes drilled and edges rounded, so it actually looks nice. Right now it looks like total garbage. The whole underneath looks like total garbage. This looks like garbage. Until I can get my final product, and I'm trying to save as much argon, so argon and wire, so I don't have to go to go pick some up, which I don't mind, but it just slows me down to get this thing done. I want to get it done, and then when I start doing everything, I mean, really I should be seam welding all the mounts here and all the body lines on this car, but I'm probably not going to. I've done that before on a Sierra, and it was it's just a lot of work. And this car is not going to be driven in anger, relative anger, so pretty much we'll just continue on, and I'll see you next time. Thank you very much for showing up. Remember, you can do it. I am nothing special. Thank you very much.